Good afternoon. Welcome to Selling 0 Days to Governments and Offensive Security Companies in Southside ABE by Maori Schwartz. Before we begin, a few brief notes. Stop by the Business Hall located in Mandalay Bay, Oceanside, and Shoreline Ballrooms on Level 2 during the day for the welcome reception at 5:30 tonight. The Black Hat Arsenal is in the Business Hall on Level 2. Join us for the Pony Awards in Lagoon JKL at 18:30. Thank you for putting your phones on vibrate. It makes it easier for the rest of us to ignore the ringing while you wait for your voicemail to pick up. And with that, let us welcome our speaker.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm super excited. It's my first time here in Black Hat and as a speaker as well. And today we're going to talk about selling 0 days to governments and offensive security companies. A little bit about myself. I'm working as a vulnerability broker in the past 4 years. Started my way at Beyond Security SSD project, a great company, highly recommended to work with. And after a year and a half, I opened my own company that focused slowly on governments and offensive security companies called QRecon. And I also work today in the insurance industry as a security researcher in one of the largest insurance company in Japan. What we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about, we'll start with who is this stock for? A little bit about my story, who is selling 0 days, what is the process of selling them, how to sell it, and of course, tips for beginners. This talk is not a technical talk and not the deep dive into the 0 day market industry. This talk is meant to give you guidelines for researchers that want to step into the market and take part of it. And of course, I'm going to share my experience and tips and tricks that I gather along the way. So my story. As I already mentioned, I founded my own company called QRecon. Started small and started to get more and more attention. Had some quite of successful deals, helping researchers to find jobs or selling their products, and also started to work with the major clients in the industry. After a few successful moves, I've been approached with one of the biggest players in my industry, and basically I got threatened to stop what I'm doing. Because this is not my main source of income, I decided it doesn't worth the risk and closed the company. But it's not the end. We'll start with an overview about the 0 day market. In traditional software companies, there is a technological problem. But if you invest enough time and money, eventually you will have a product. It doesn't matter if it will be the best product, but you will have a product. But vulnerabilities behave a little bit different. It's sort of an art other than something that you just can put money on and you will get the results. So from vendor perspective, they can put a lot of money into it, but they will not find the core vulnerabilities in their products. So it behaves a little bit different. A little bit about the history here. In the past 5 years, the 0 day industry changed drastically. If we're talking about increased number of players, brokerage company, conferences, bug bounties, budgets are basically unlimited. Another really interesting thing that happened in the past 5 years is the fact that I call that stepping out of the shadows. In the 5 years ago, if you want to sell something, it was something that you talk about in a dark alley or something like that no one knows of. But today we see more and more companies and players that actually publish it, that they are looking to buy vulnerabilities and exploits on the free market. So there is starting working with invoices and companies and contracts, that things that we didn't see 5 years ago. But okay, who is interested in the 0 day industry? There are different players in the community and they're all interested in 0 days, but the target in the end is a little bit different. I'm kind of conservative here and I put the 3 different groups that we're all familiar with. We have the white hats, the gray hats, and the black hats. Again, it's more historical than other represent the nature of the 0 day today, but let's start with that. So who is buying what? Because each community has different needs and different perspective about the zero-day industry. We will start with the white hat because it's the easiest and we need to talk about them a little bit. The HackerOne report from 2018 shows there are more than 166,000 registered hackers, and they submitted more than 72,000 vulnerabilities. As you can see, the majority is in web vulnerabilities, meaning XSS, CSRF. I call them low-hanging fruits, easy to find and quick money. And we can see that it's not only in 2018. In 2019, it's the same thing. We have more hackers out there, but the results are the same. More than 73% are focused on web security. Low-hanging fruits, easy to find, easy money. It's not just HackerOne, we also see that in Bugcrowd. Also, 2018, the higher pay was for XSS, and in 2010, the same thing. So what does it tell us about the white hat community? That it's a huge community, that there is a lot of vulnerability submitted to the different bug bounty programs, but in the end, the majority are web-related and not the hardcore or high-end products. But there are also high-end researchers that contribute to the security of different vendors. They're either ideology motivated or PR motivated. And we can see them in the acknowledgement of every major company that publishes like new versions. Here there is just some of them that I just pick up randomly, but there's a lot of them. If I would try to summarize the white hats, because we need, as I said, we need to talk about them. So there's a lot of vulnerability researchers out there. They are looking for low-hanging fruits and easy targets because it's quick and easy money. And the high-end researchers are focused, are motivated either by PR or they want to make the ideology motivated and they want to make the internet more secured. So we talked about the white hats because we should talk about them, but the other two different groups are slightly different and they're looking for different things. So what are they interested in? They're interested in the high-end market. Again, this is how I phrase it. So we can see here that we have traditional browsers and OS-related vulnerabilities, but on the right side you can see the fat unicorn, and I love this picture. That's supposed to represent different kind of vulnerabilities, something that is quite unique, even in the zero-day industry. We're talking about zero clicks. We're talking about RCE20IM, for example, WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal or whatever. Those are quite unique, and we'll talk about it, player looking for those vulnerabilities. But again, the majority is focused on either the browsers or the OS. Of course, no user interaction, pre-auth, etc. This is what the zero-day industry is all about. From researcher perspective, they need to understand that the service map they can offer is not just an end product. They can sell different things. We will start with the end product because it's easier to understand. As a researcher, you can sell a full vector, meaning a combination of different vulnerabilities that in the end will allow you to get a persistency about your target. We're talking about remote code execution, local privilege escalation, and persistency. But you can also sell each one of them individually, meaning you can sell the RC alone, the LP alone, etc. But most of the researchers do not know that. You can also sell part in the chain, meaning infoleaks and mitigation bypass. Those are really common in the industry and you can make a decent living out of them. But other than end product, we also have services. And I will touch them in the following slides, but to give you the idea, you can sell a dedicated researcher, meaning that a company or a government will outsource the vulnerability research to other companies or individuals to find things. You can also provide workshops, but workshop here meaning that each really big conferences have workshops, Black Hat included. But there are also workshops that are only specific to governments and security companies that are specific domains, and you know what, for example, if a company wants to step into a new domain, they will hire a workshop that someone that is already familiar with that to close the gap as soon as possible. Consulting is another way of services that the researchers can offer. For example, validate other researchers' vulnerability, or just like answering questions for the research team from the government or the offensive security company. And of course, support. And I will talk about it a little bit later because it's really important bullet. What is the difference between governments and companies? I mentioned them quite a lot, but there's different groups inside those basic groups. The first, let's talk about the offensive security companies because they are the easiest one to understand. We have security companies that are focused on products, meaning they're selling to governments, organizations. Here, the company actually sells the entire infrastructure. They're not just selling the zero-day themselves, meaning that they sell the vulnerabilities, the malware, the infrastructure, the proxy, the intelligence infrastructure that comes along with that. And on the other hand, we have knowledge-based companies, meaning they are selling 0 days. That's what they're doing, that's what they're for. On the government side, we have two different government entities, let's put it that way. The incapable countries and capable countries. Incapable countries, and I will take a made-up example, I'll take Antarctica, just not to offend anyone. And Antarctica want to acquire vulnerabilities, but they don't have an internal research team. Meaning that if you will offer them, even for free, an RCE for one of the platforms that are interested, they would not know what to do with that. Meaning they do not understand the value of it, they don't know how to chain it, they don't know how to write new exploits to older or newer versions. So those are incapable countries. Most of them will buy the end products from the security companies. On the other hand, we have the capable countries with a strong internal research team. They can actually value the item itself and they can do things with that. For example, chain it to other vulnerabilities and create different vectors. From researchers' perspective, you want to focus on those, on all the offensive security companies and governments that has an internal research team, because they will understand the value of it and are willing to pay more. So let's start. How do you get those 0 days, right? From the researchers, there are different kinds of groups in the researchers. We start with the biggest one called researchers, and I already showed you there are more than hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world, but they are not high-end researchers. They're not capable of finding vulnerabilities in the products that I showed you earlier. So if we go step one layer down, we have the high-end researchers that I already mentioned that they are either ideology motivated or PR motivated. And then we have the high-end researchers that work in the offensive security companies or governments, and in the end willing to sell. Meaning that there are individuals or companies that find 0 days and sell it in the open market. Roughly around 400 people worldwide. That's the estimate I have. If you have any other best figure, I will be glad to hear. This chart is based solely based on my experience. Each researcher, I met quite a lot of researchers in the past 4 years. I can pinpoint where they are in this chart. How does the chart works? Usually when you're in young age, around 20, you don't really familiar with the 0 day industry and you don't know that your item worth money. So that's why you basically publish it for free online. You report the vulnerability to the vendor and then you got to start to get attention. Then you step into the second step and the second column here that you get offered to work in offensive security industry, companies or governments. At that point, you make a really decent salary, but you understand that your boss making a lot more on your items. So at that point, you decide to open your own company because you are the researcher, you know exactly what to do, and you said, okay, I have the technical capabilities to find vulnerabilities. But what those researchers don't know, it's how to manage a company. Because finding zero days, it's only a technical part, but you also need to have a company. That means that you need to work with the legal and accountants and find clients, and it's really hard work to do. And usually you get paid only slowly on your items that you sell. So if you didn't find a vulnerability for 4 months in a row, you don't have any income, and probably you're in the age of 32 and you want to make your own family. So at that point you start to get stressed. That's why we go to the end or the right side of the slide. We can see they started to take more and more projects that are not vulnerability research. For example, pen tests, or they really want a steady income, so they're going to work with one of the major vendors in the market. So again, this is solely on my experience, but I can pinpoint each one of the researchers that I work with based upon that. From the researcher's perspective, those are the two time slots that you have to sell your vulnerabilities, and this lecture will focus on them. So what we learned so far, what kind of products and governments are looking into, what is the different products and services that you can offer, what is the difference between governments and companies, and of course, the researchers' characteristics. I hate that word. Okay, so what is the process? Selling 0 days. That's why we're here. The process is relatively straightforward. A researcher finds a vulnerability, and he wants to market it. So he contacts a potential client. He provides an overview about the vulnerability and what the capability of the vulnerability is. There's a negotiation period. There is a contract, QA, and of course, payment. I will start with those 4 bullets, but eventually each one of here in the audience, I think, is interested in the payment. So payouts. By default, as a researcher, you are expect to get paid more than the vendor bug bounty. Because if it's the same amount of money, I think the majority will go to the vendor and try to do, from their perspective, the right thing. But from a researcher, there is no a single price list. There is no www.howmuchmyvulnerabilityworth.com. So today, researchers base their pricing on those 3 bullets. First of all, competition. If you can get paid from phone to own $80,000 for an LP, so this is your benchmark. Another example is rumors. When researchers sell, they usually talk about that. And you have the idea of how much things worth. And of course, we have hacking team-like incident that we actually saw how much they paid for a specific vulnerability. The one company that changed the game of the rules basically are Zerodium, because they just published the list. Around 3 years in a row, this was the benchmark. Like researchers, when they try to sell vulnerability, the first thing they do went to the Zerodium website and see how much they are willing to pay for it. But in reality, things are much more complicated. There is a metrics for each vulnerability. There are different parameters that we need to understand before we can provide you an estimate of how much the vulnerability is actually worth. I will go over them, but there are 2 things that you need to understand before. The first one is different entities will pay different sums for the same vulnerability. And the second thing is warranty and the model the client works is really matter. But the majority of the, how do you do pricing for vulnerability or for an item? It's supply and demand. Because if there is, if you have a vulnerability, for example, for an iOS, and all the clients or all the industry already have a solution, so mean that no one will buy it from you or the price will be lower than expected. Exclusive and non-exclusive is really important as well. If you asked me 6 months ago, this price, just a second, it's the second slide. There is a price list that I'm going to show you, and all the prices were for only exclusive. But today, the majority of the pricing is going to non-exclusive, and the price is really high. Because as a researcher, you want to maximize the amount of money that you can get for a single vulnerability. So I said warranty and sell model, it's important. Why is that? A company can offer you $1.5 million for vulnerability, but in their terms, it will be split over 12 months, and they will give it to their customers on day one, meaning that I'm not sure a vulnerability will last 1 full year, and you will get the full $1.5 million. So it's really important to understand the terms that you are selling your item. This is the price list that I talked about, and what you can see here, it's prices for non-exclusive items. Again, 6 months ago, I told you it was for exclusive vulnerability, but in today reality, we're talking about non-exclusive. As you can see on the left side of the slide, assuming that is 95% reliability or something similar to that, and up to 5-second execution time. So we are talking about not just I found the crash and I think I can actually exploit it. We are talking about exploits that are really easy to understand and are already to put in production. As I already mentioned, just because you have an item doesn't mean there is an active buyer that's willing to buy it for you. So it's really differentiate between times. And again, market demand changes regularly. I show you the big list of products that offensive security companies and governments are interested, but it's changed from time to time. For example, 2 years ago, we saw that one of the vulnerabilities that we're trying to find, I forgot the name. Sorry for that. I'll get to it later. But there is the high-end vulnerabilities that I show you already that are in regular demand. Okay, so let's talk about validation of the vulnerability by the client. The following slides are more legal from that perspective, but I'm not a lawyer. So each one of you that want to step into this market, I highly recommend you to find a lawyer. So let's start. We'll start with a spec. What is a spec? As a researcher, you don't want to give the technical information about the vulnerability when you want to sell the vulnerability to a client. Therefore, as a researcher, you guarantee the end result of the vulnerability on a predefined configuration. The client will test your item based upon that spec. And if your item is not comply to the spec you sent, it can decline the offer itself. Again, there is a margin here about 5% that you can make it like the vulnerability you said it's 95%, and in reality it's 90%. It's still okay, but never claim that it's more than what it should be. Validation period. Usually 14 days, the client has the ability to test your item. In this period, the validation period, the client can decline the offer if it doesn't comply with the spec you send them. But there are 3 different things I want you to take from this slide. The first one is make sure that you get access to the test environment, for the client test environment. Because sometimes the client don't know how to operate the vulnerability as you intended to, and therefore it can actually take a bad turn and close the deal. And when possible, make sure you can supply a full environment for the test environment for the client itself in a VM or whatever sort for you. And the third one, it's just make sure just before you send the item itself, make sure the client is ready to receive the item itself and the test environment is already set up. Because again, you send your item and you don't know what will go with that, and you want to make sure everything goes smoothly as possible. Fees and payments. The first thing that I wanted to make sure everyone in the audience understand that there is no such a thing an advance payment. There are a lot of hustlers in the world that will try to contact you and say, I have this amazing vulnerability with the perfect spec and reasonable price. But they will tell you that, I only need $5,000 to buy a flight ticket from one point to another. Just to make sure that you show me that you're serious, you will pay for it. So no, those are hustlers, and we saw so many of them, and they actually been published in Twitter, several of them, But again, I'm not here to show you the names, but it's true. So that's why you would not get paid before the client actually tests the vulnerability. Payments. There is the split the risk approach that the majority of clients work with, meaning that you will get X percentage after the validation period, and then the rest split in chunks for 3 or 6 months, usually 3 months. And if it's a relatively small transaction, meaning up to $100,000, it's 100% after validation. Of course, as I said before, we're stepping out of the shadows, meaning that VAT invoices is really important. And because of it, cryptocurrency became more and more difficult to handle. Because for a company to purchase that amount of, like Bitcoin, for example, or cryptocurrency, this is making it basically impossible to do so. So if you're working with invoices, you will get bank transfer, and that's what we're aiming for. And of course, just to note it here, the majority of transactions are in US dollars. Just make sure you have a US dollar account to actually receive the money. Okay, next, property rights. When we're talking about property rights, each deal has two different, it's binary. It's or you sell it exclusively or non-exclusive. When you're talking about non-exclusive, the researcher sells and licenses to the vulnerability. And the license can be used or resell to other clients as well. It can be sold multiple times and no problem with that. The problem is when we go to exclusive, because the buyer acquires everything. All the IP, all title, all copyrights is owned by the client himself. Meaning that if you want to actually use your own vulnerability to find other vulnerabilities, and iOS is a really great example for that, so you're not allowed to. So just make sure that you as a researcher, when you try to make a contract, you put that as one of the things that you can actually allow to do. Use the vulnerability for yourself in a private matter in order to find other items. Next, support. I told you that I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And support can take many forms. It can be exploit adjustments to older or newer versions. And if the vulnerability is patched, you as the researcher have to provide a new vulnerability. And also you can provide a workshop on the vulnerability to the client itself. But what you need to understand that support worth a lot of money. Don't just give it away for free. Meaning that if you are giving kind of support, make sure you get paid for it. Governing law. Governing law, it's basically if everything turned horribly wrong, where you can sue. Because again, not the client, neither the researcher want to go there, but sometimes we need to understand what are the laws that you are applicable to. For example, if you are a French researcher and you sold it to a US-based company, in which law are you under? The US law or the French law? It's really important to make sure that you, the researcher, define exactly where the law are governing. Export liability. And here comes the funny part. Wassenaar Agreement. I'm sure that your majority that sits here know that Wassenaar Agreement is for dual-use items. For example, you can buy radar for civilian uses and put it in an airport, or you can buy it and use it as a military use. So those things are for dual use. What's so special about that? In the past few years, under Wassenaar Agreement, vulnerabilities and exploits have been added. But what you need to understand that each government or each country has a slightly different laws regarding the Wassenaar Agreement. Because Wassenaar Agreement, it's an agreement. It's not equal law. So each government that signed the contract actually obligated to form rules based on the agreement itself in their own country. So each country has the freedom to slightly regulate different rules. So it's really important to understand the rules in your country. This is like from the Wassenaar Agreement. It's just it's just a copy-paste, so it's not that important. But what if I try to show it to you in a really easy way, the Wassenaar Agreement distinct two vectors. The first one is that you are a researcher and you want to report it to the vendor. At that point, you're good to go. You don't need any licenses and you don't break any law. But if you try to sell the vulnerability or exploit to a third party that it's not directly the vendor, here you need to have your licenses ready. And usually the one that the organization that hand those licenses are the Ministry of Defense in the majority of countries. So you need a license for marketing and you also need licenses for the sale itself. And it's really a long process. So please start it as soon as possible. Finding the customers. Sounds easy, right? I have a vulnerability. I know that everyone wants it. How do I contact the different clients? So there are three different ways that I thought of. You have the official way, you have the personal connection, and of course you have the vulnerability brokers that I'm one of them. Let's start with the official point of contact. Some governments and offensive security companies, they have this official point of contact. It can be here in conferences that you will be approached by one of them. It can be by business cards, cold email, etc. And again, as a researcher, if you think a company is interested in 0 days, you can just ask them, and they probably will reply you. If we're talking about governments, it's slightly different. The majority of governments would not like to work with you directly. They have a person that they already work with. It can be a broker, it can be a company, and usually he do the entire process. So some of them are not that will be openly work with you, but some of them are. But what you need to understand that it's really time consuming. And don't expect amazing terms because they're a big organization and it takes a lot of time to actually make a deal because they need to approve the contract, they approve the budget, and this thing takes quite a lot of time. If we're talking about the pros and cons here about official point of contact, so you know exactly who you're selling to. It's really easy to understand. But there's a lot of cons related to that. It depends where the company is based. The legal part is really important because the last thing you want to do is actually get involved in an illegal transaction. If we're talking about personal connection, it's basically the same thing. But you can say that you will get fully paid because you know the person and they know you and you have a trust relationship between you. So it's really important, but again, it's more of the same. If we're talking about vulnerability brokers, and again, I'm one of them, there are different service maps that we offer. It's not the full service map, but yeah, this is me there. But again, I will focus on selling and end products because this talk is all about. So there's a lot of benefits to work with brokers, right? Because as a researcher, you can stay anonymous. We understand the market landscape, we understand the pricing and how the process works. We have a close and intimate relationship with our clients, meaning that they will approach us and ask us, do you have item A, B, and C? And therefore, we can maximum the amount of money the researcher can get paid. Legal aspect is also important because from legal perspective, brokers has different entities in different places around the world. And it's their responsibility to actually provide the licensing to export it. So if you are for example, EU-based researcher and you want to sell it outside of the EU, you're not allowed to. You need licenses. But once you work with brokers with EU entity, it's his responsibility to provide those licenses in order to export it. So it's really big benefit to work with brokers. How does brokers make their money, right? Because they don't work for free, except me, and I will tell you all about that in a second. Broker fees, it's one way to do business. They take X percentage out of each transaction. Another option is reseller, meaning that I am the broker, I bought the vulnerability and I will sell it multiple times. It can be if I buy that exclusive or non-exclusive, it doesn't matter. It depends how many clients I have and what they're willing to offer. And the third one is subscription, a yearly or a monthly fee. That if the government or clients go with that route, they can make use of whatever vulnerabilities the broker offer. If I'll try to summarize up everything here, don't waste time on the zero-day industry if your vulnerability is not mature enough, because it will waste the client's time and your time. It will never lead to a successful deal. Ensure your vulnerability is ready to use and your POC is stable. Just because, and I already mentioned that, if you have an item and no one wants to buy it, it doesn't really matter, right? And never oversell a vulnerability. It just will not work. This is really important. On the right side, you see the bullet, meaning that, again, finding vulnerabilities and exploit them are two different set skills. The majority of researchers are focused or expert in one of them. So if you have this beautiful vulnerability, but the exploit is the problem, please tell it, because it can literally save the deal. Because, again, most of the clients and governments have an internal research team. And once they understand that, they will be willing to pay you the full amount or reduce a little bit just because the exploit isn't good enough. Doesn't mean the vulnerability isn't. Never treat or tell about successful deals, because again, it will breach the confidentiality contract, and you don't want to do that. And if you sell non-exclusive, try to limit yourself to 3 to 4 trusted clients, because if you will sell it for multiple times, you will burn the vulnerability and your credit will be harmed because of it. People would not like to work with you. Another aspect of it, it's always listen to feedbacks, meaning that if you are a Linux researcher and your client tell you, look, you should move to Android, you should consider that, because the client is believing you and understand that you can actually deliver if you change the domain. And basically, they do that because they think it will be better for you, because Android is more popular than Linux, and it's really important to understand that. 0 days lately burn a lot more faster, of course, when we are talking about browsers. So again, in fact, if one client offer you, I don't know, $100,000 less than the market itself, sometimes it's the best deal, and you should take it. And of course, transactions sometimes not go to the entire process, but if they do, it's amazing and it's worth it. I already said that supply and demand is the most important parameter when you're selling vulnerability. Again, it's more of the same here, that when the market is flooded, you will have difficulty to sell the vulnerability. And exclusive might seem easy to work around, meaning that you will sell one client exclusively, but in the end, you'll sell it multiple times. It's really important for you as a researcher to understand that we all connected. All the clients are talking with each other. All the brokers are talking with each other. So if you do something like that, you will be, people would not want to work with you in the end because they would not trust you. And this is the most important part. My takeaway, the biggest takeaway I want you to take it from here is just, if you want to start working in the zero-day industry, open a company. Because you can work in a very, very legal way, in a very traditional way, with invoices, legal and everything, and it will make your life really easier to do. So I promised some tips and tricks that I gathered along the way. So from researchers that want to step into this market and take part of it, go play CTFs. CTF is a really good opportunity for clients to approach you. They see how talented are you, and you can, again, it's really important for you to do that. Go to conferences, especially like that. I have so many clients here, and they will approach different researchers just because they're familiar with, they know about, read about, publish. It's really important. Get help when in doubt, because again, there is an amazing community of researchers that will help you if you find something that they will take it from one level into the next. And they're willing to do that for free, the majority of them at least. And know your shit, never fake it till you make it, because it won't work. Again, the clients are interested in the end product, and they judge you upon those, not anything else. How can I help you on your journey? I closed my company a year ago, but I still offer my services for free. People call me nuts, but I really love the industry, and I work with a lot of researchers and help them along the way. I have a slightly different approach from other brokers, but I can just ask me anything you like. I will be more than happy to help you. Questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I don't hear you. Okay. So he asked if, during the validation period, if you already provide the source code itself. So the answer for that is yes, because the first step is signing a contract. After you sign a contract, the client has to validate your item, and they do that by the source itself.
Okay, so just say I buy one of these 0 days, and it gets patched 3 months down the line, or 6 months down the line. What happens to that contract at 0 days?
It depends. Okay, the question is, what happened if I sold a vulnerability and after 6 months it got patched? So if you like in the agreement, you said that you will get paid 50% on validation, and the rest in 3 months chunk, nothing will happen. You will get the full amount. It doesn't, okay. The question is, if the client has a duplicate, what will happen? From the client perspective, he will be obligated to pay the full amount of the item itself, because you send them the spec, and that's what you guarantee the item do. I don't care, and the client, like I am as a broker and you as a researcher, don't care that the client already has it. So we will pay the full amount. Yep. I can't see, but okay.
Okay, so just a question, general, like what would be the motivations for clients to buy vulnerabilities like that if it's not their product?
Sorry?
What would be the motivation for a client to search for a vulnerability if it's not their product? What are they usually interested in?
We're talking about like the offensive security world, right? Like we're on the same page here? Okay, so we're talking about companies that offer the full products, as I mentioned earlier, meaning that there are companies, there are governments or government organizations, they don't have the knowledge to create those kinds of products or vectors. So they will buy it either by each vulnerability separately or the entire product on the infrastructure. So that's their motivation. Yeah.
In your experience, how many of the transactions that you started down the road on failed versus succeeded? I know it's a limited sample size, but
sorry, can you please repeat?
Of how many of the transactions that you started down the road on, or research you started work on, how many times did it fail to
it never failed.
Succeed?
Again, in my experience, in the past 4 years, never.
Really?
When the spec was really good, the client know exactly what he's getting. I had 0 fail rate. So.
Of companies that currently have vulnerability rewards programs or bug bounties, what do you think they can do differently to attract these researchers instead of them going to third parties?
I'm really sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
So, of companies that currently have vulnerability rewards programs, bug bounties, what should they do differently to attract these researchers? Aside from, paying them a lot more money, what things can they do?
So I have different answers to that questions, but the majority of researchers just love the fact that they're not reported to the vendor itself. So it really depends, because I saw so many bug bounty programs that try to aim researchers to find the specific vulnerability types, and that they will be really exploitable and they actually can mitigate them. But in reality, the majority of researchers that participate in the zero-day industry, they just want to get the money and the thrill out of it. So it's a little bit of a problem.
Thanks.
You mentioned that there were 400 people involved in worldwide in selling. As a broker, how do you find them, or do they find you?
It goes both ways, I think, because again, this is part of my day-to-day job, so I connect with a lot of researchers, and they, of course, connect me as well. In my case, referral is really part of it, because if you help researcher to sell his item and he had a really good experience with you, he will refer other to you as well.
You mentioned in your talk that you said that O-Days burned a lot faster because of P0 and such. Can you expand on that?
Yep. Every time Project Zero usually publish 3 or 4 vulnerabilities, they close the same vulnerabilities into the industry. Again, there's a lot of talented researchers in the offensive security industry. They don't just publish or report to the vendor. And the majority of bugs that Project Zero already found, the researchers in the offensive security industry found them and exploit them and even use them in the wild.
As more countries are adding vulnerabilities equities process programs, how does that affect the offensive sale? Are they adding in that this has to go through the VET process, for example, within the United States or other countries with VET programs?
Sorry, again? Okay, got it. It really depends, because if we're talking about BugCrowd and HackerOne, they're only a platform. In the end, the vendor itself is the client, and he will get vulnerability. I got it correctly, or?
So the U.S. government process is that if they're in possession of a vulnerability, it needs to go through an interagency review process. I would think that would affect. Does that matter to you, or once you sell it to them as part of the contract, what they have to do to see if they're going to disclose to the vendor for the internal process within the U.S. government, does that matter to you as the broker or to the researcher?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm really sorry. Can you please?
Okay, so it's okay. Thanks.
Okay, I'll try to answer that later if it's okay. Okay.
Hey, man.
Just say I want to buy a product from a foreign country.
Okay.
And I want to know if there's 0 days out there available for that product. Would I go to a brokerage yourself to find those out, or would I contact them first and see if they have any idea of what's going on in their system? I think they'll lie to me if I go to them.
Who will lie to you?
I'm trying to buy a product from another government, for instance.
If you want to buy a product from another government, okay. It's really okay. Usually companies, like product companies, do not sell to individual or other companies. They only sell it to governments. Because it's dual use, they need to have an end user and end use certificate. So not companies cannot issue them, only governments. And this is your second question. The first one, so if you want to buy anything, usually as a client or company or government, the easiest way is to go through brokers. But again, you can open your own team that buy and acquire them and actually publish official point of contact, for example.
Yeah, good question. Has the Wassenaar Agreement sort of impacted the zero-day broker industry?
A lot. The Wassenaar Agreement changed the game rules, from one way to another. Because today, researchers do understand that if they don't have the licenses, they are in big trouble. So I published on Twitter a few weeks ago that $1,300 $100, I think, no, 30 something dollars for a Sandbox Escape from Chrome. And the value of the market, it's like around 600,000. So people say that the market is not regulated, but it truly is, because researchers understand that clients, they open different subsidiaries in different countries in order to be able to acquire vulnerabilities from different entities. So to answer your question, yes, a lot.
So they're just bypassing the agreement?
Sorry?
They just bypass the agreement by opening up companies in other countries?
Does the Wassenaar agreement?
They bypass the Wassenaar restrictions by opening up
I
companies?
will be more than happy to help you, but I'm running out of time. So I'm right here if anyone wants to ask anything. Thank you very much for your time.